Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am chatting with Sara Gramling. She is head of brand and community at Magnolia Bakery. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Sara is a very rare case of someone who has been at one brand for a very long time. So Sara has worked at Magnolia Bakery for 15 years, which is incredible. Congratulations on that incredible accomplishment. And also, I
Thank
think a
you.
really unique, of course, a really unique perspective on career of growing with one brand. So I am so excited to jump into your career journey, your lessons, your advice, all of the good things. But before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I currently live in Brooklyn with my family. I have two young kids. And as head of brand and community, a lot of my work spans partnerships, earned communications. PR outreach and securing media coverage for the brand and what we're doing in our stores. We work on philanthropy and working with local partners to support our communities, and then overseeing things like influencer outreach, content development for social, magnoliabakery.com, and emails as well. So essentially anything that's talking about the brand that goes out to our fans and our community sort of are things that I oversee or work with our team on.
Incredible. So touching a lot of different stuff at
Yeah.
Magnolia.
Yep.
Awesome. So I think with you, I honestly, I think the biggest question I have in my head is what was your first position at Magnolia Bakery? Obviously, we know where you are now, but kind of where did you start out?
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting about both my career journey and the company is that there's been so much evolution over those 15 years. So I think sometimes when people think of being at a place for a long time, they think of it maybe not feeling exciting or having different roles or responsibilities. My job has never been stagnant from day one. There's always a new store opening or a new business channel that we're launching or new opportunities to work with partners. And so, I think that has kept the role really interesting and also kept me really curious about what is that next step. It's wild to say that when I started at Magnolia, like Instagram did not exist, you
Oh
know?
my
So
goodness.
when you think about like the scope of my work and what I do day to day, it has truly evolved so much, not only because of what the brand has done, but also the channels that we use and we talk about the brand with. So I started just managing PR. That was really a main focus for the brand. And we didn't really leverage paid media. And so that side of the business was not something that we tapped into, from a more traditional marketing standpoint. We didn't have our own website, so we really relied on kind of word of mouth through media coverage to build brand awareness. And at that time, especially, we tapped into a lot of the pop culture, elements that were really tied to the brand. Being in Sex and the City, being on Saturday Night Live, those were like very tangible things that people around the world could connect to. Even if they weren't going to Magnolia, they knew about the brand because they had seen it on these shows. And that really provided an opportunity to get media coverage where a brand who didn't necessarily have those connections, they might not be able to secure. And as the years went on, we built our own website. We started shipping some of our products nationwide. We opened new stores in Chicago and continued, building up our store in Los Angeles. And then we started franchising internationally in 2011. And so that taps into an entirely not only new opportunity to work on, but really a new skill set. Um, not to mention things like social growth or adding email comms into that. And I think I would say 4 years or so, my job kind of shifts in this really positive way because I'm able to take what I've learned from the previous years and bring it into whatever my new responsibilities are, and continue to grow with the brand, but also in my own skill set and own responsibilities, which has been really exciting.
I think Magnolia is special in that it truly has kept up and changed with the time. And I feel like sometimes older brands, not that Magnolia is that old, but just that they kind of get stuck and they don't change a lot or adapt. And so I
Hmm.
can see how that can make staying at one company exciting when they're growing because that gives you a chance to grow.
Yes, absolutely. And I think COVID is a really, both unfortunate, right, but also a great example of that is we were kind of set up to ship our products nationwide and do local delivery for people. And because we were in that position, we were able to really pivot the whole business to focus on that, continue to grow our business and keep things, stable, and use that to get media coverage about like the best birthday cakes to order when you're celebrating at home. So much of my job too, and the whole team here is really just like both staying focused, but making those small tweaks when we need to or when we can to make sure that we're still, very much, being talked about and, launching new products and being part of sort of the culture of the moment.
And are you the oldest or the longest employee that's been at the company, or the people that have been there longer than you?
What's interesting? There's a handful of us that have been with the
Really?
company for a very long time. Yeah, in fact, a couple of us started within like weeks of each other.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
so
yeah, we've grown substantially and certainly had many team members since we started, but there's definitely a good pool of people who have been here for quite a while.
that's really cool. And I'm sure that also speaks to what it's like working for the brand too, if people have
Hmm.
stayed along for that long.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so you mentioned you started in PR, and you kind of mentioned some fun PR placements like Sex in the City. Is that something that you got to work on in your time there?
No, so actually, that was a very organic opportunity that came up for the original owners of the bakery. Our original store is in the West Village of New York City. It's right on a corner, and it was popular with some of the actresses and team that worked on Sex and the City, the original series. And they kind of just decided to shoot there one day. It's not something that was planned. And I think, truthfully, no one anticipated that it would have such a reaction. And truly, decades later now, we're talking, right? There's still that connection with the show. People watching it for the first time or rewatching it on Netflix, are still seeing that and having that connection to it. And we get travelers from all over the world as well who come to that specific store because of seeing it on the show.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. I do think, we've, sometimes tried to come up with the exact reason. I do think part of it might be that on that show in particular, a lot of the brands that were showcased may not be, in someone's budget, right? We can't all afford Manolo Blahniks, but you can treat yourself to a cupcake. And
Yeah.
so it was an opportunity to connect with that show in a real way that was a scene in the show, and still have it be like part of your New York experience.
Yeah. When I on the Sky Side team, we are kind of going through the podcast lineup. And we have one team member that's not based in America; she's based in Mexico. And
Hmm.
she's like, "Oh my gosh, Magnolia Bakery!" And that's the one I'm most excited for you to interview.
Oh,
Like,
that's
that's so
great. Oh, I
cool.
love
That's so
that.
exciting.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool that the brand, feels special not just for people like live in New York or that live in the states that know
Hmm.
about it, but for those who are international. That yeah, that it's exciting when you come to the States to be able to go to Magnolia Bakery, or that it, yeah, transcends beyond the country that
Hmm.
it's based in.
Yeah, and I think our motto is sort of make today sweeter than yesterday, and people, uh, all over the world celebrate things, right? Small things, big things, sometimes you just need to pick me up. And I think there's so much joy that comes from working for a brand that's able to provide that to people. And so that's really at the root of what we do. We do that in a lot of different ways, and that, comes to life in many different ways. But at the core, it's really to bring joy to life and really, be with people in these moments. And, it's interesting earlier today during a town hall we had as a company, we were talking about how it's so interesting when you mention that you work for Magnolia Bakery. Everyone has a story, a connection to the brand, a trip to New York, or they always get their birthday cake from there. There's so many ways that people connect with it. And that is, of course, such a lovely response to the work that we do day in and day out here in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I know one of the things you had mentioned to me prior was that you're kind of passionate about the balance between being comfortable and uncomfortable, which is
Hmm.
essential to growing. And for someone who has been at the same company for a lot of years, how have you balanced, like, I'm sure there's some comfortability or safety that comes with being, with one company for so long, but
Hmm.
also needing to, push yourself to get promoted or to change roles. So how have you balanced that within your career with staying at one company?
Yeah, I think, it's a great question because I think it's human nature to not want to feel stagnant. There are periods in our life where we might feel overwhelmed by taking on too much. That's just a natural part of being human in this crazy world, right? But I think when you can, to raise your hand and say, want to learn about this, I want to try that new system we have in place. I want to be part of those conversations when we launch a new business channel. And curiosity is sort of the best asset to have. And so I've been really fortunate that as a company, we've always been adding new business channels or always been adjusting our business strategy so that I could tap into very different things, international franchising or launching the website. We went through a rebrand a few years ago, and those opportunities were both really interesting, just from a personal standpoint, even to go through that process. But I think professionally, it's just, you keep adding to your kind of list of skill sets and your own personal interests. And I think just as important, it kind of also shows you what maybe you're not interested in pursuing. Sometimes you start a job and you're like, this is my passion. This is absolutely the lane that I want to be in. And in talking to different people and working on different projects, you ultimately find that you're kind of like more over here, than straight down. And I think if you're really lucky, you have a team around you and managers, above you who kind of ask, what are you most interested in pursuing so that they can set you up not immediately, but longer term to be able to take that path. And I was really fortunate to have that, over the past, 4 or 5 years, especially of just what direction do you want to head in? And I think partnerships in particular was something that I was really drawn to. And that was an element that was then added to my work. And it's really expanded not only what I work on, but just, again, it kind of like makes me curious about what can I do differently? How can I change that? And kind of always learning from those experiences.
Yeah. I think brand partnerships, I love that that's a place you are excited about and obviously where you kind of took your career. But I think especially right now, I know at least with my friends and I, it's like the most exciting marketing news is when we
Mm-hmm.
hear brands we love partner with other brands we love. And it's just, it's so fun to see those things come together. And I know with
Mm-hmm.
the stuff I'm, sending in Instagram group chat or that I love talking about with my friends or just love seeing brands do. So can you share some insight into what it looks like behind the scenes on brand partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. And, because the brand will turn 30 next year.
Oh my goodness.
So we really have been around for a substantial amount of time, I think, especially in the hospitality world. So because of that, we get a lot of inbound requests. Not all of them make sense. It's always very flattering when any company of any size reaches out to think of you. A few years ago, we pivoted how we thought about partnerships so that for a long time, it was things coming into the bakery. And so it was we would be making a product in celebration of a movie or a new product launch, something of that nature. And then a few years ago, we thought our goal is really to bring Magnolia to people in completely new and unexpected ways. So we can't really do that if we always focus on the inside of our product, right? In the inside of our stores. And that really, gave us an opportunity to reach out to different brands. Some of our like first ones was aligned with New York or Nowhere, which is this amazing company, obviously based in New York. They make, all different apparel. They have a great line with the Knicks right now, and they have a little store in Soho. But they created a Magnolia Bakery line of New York or Nowhere items. And that sort of kicked off a lot of just really creative and interesting ways of bringing Magnolia Bakery to completely new audiences. We had a line of luggage with Monos and a candle with Boy Smells and a body scrub with Tula. I mean, things that, if you'd asked me like even 5 or 10 years ago, if we would do that, it'd be like, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. And now we're always seeking new ways of showing up. I think for us, what's kind of very interesting too is how can we do that? That's not just food because we have food, right? We don't always need to do a mashup. We can, that's one thing we can do, but how do we make something completely, unique and outside of our category that still connects with consumers? And we've been really fortunate. We've worked with amazing partners that truly collaborative process to bring these things to market. And, that sort of those partnerships are then an opportunity to leverage for that press, coverage or for that influencer outreach. And we sort of tap into all the channels that we use to be able to market it.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And honestly, a point that maybe an outsider like me wouldn't have necessarily realized of that power of, yeah, it makes maybe more sense to do like a flavor of something in store that people can come in and get. But by doing those more unexpected partnerships, you are not just building the product, but you're building the brand, and you're making the brand
Hmm.
so much more than just a bakery, but something that means a lot more and that people that don't maybe live near one can still connect with and participate with and engage with. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
so fun and exciting to hear. Are there any partnerships that you have worked on that kind of stand out to be favorites?
Oh man, it's honestly hard to choose. I
Pick your
think
favorite child.
I think for me, one of the most exciting was the Monos partnership with the luggage. We did a line, we had just rebranded. We had this beautiful new color palette. And so they created a line that was like the banana pudding yellow and the icing purple. And it's still on sale today. It was really well received. I think for me, it was also just they were such a great team to work with and learning the process. It was sort of our first, time wading in those waters of like working with a partner in that capacity and coming up with something we weren't quite sure how people would respond to, right? It's like something totally out of our wheelhouse. But I think, the other one that really stands out is our line with Incredibles. So it's an edible bar, it's a chocolate bar with THC in it, it's working with Green Thumb Industries. And again, just something totally different from the brand and the retail bakeries that people relate to, but still really connected with a wide audience. And again, just incredible partners to work with.
Is your goal with partnerships? So it sounds like some of those are longer going, where you can still buy that product, and I'm sure the goal there is revenue. But are there partnerships that you do that the goal is not revenue, but the goal is purely awareness?
So actually, the bulk of our relationships are built around driving awareness, driving social conversation. We do intend for them to be short term. It's up to the partner, like Monos and Voicemails is another example. It's been so successful for them. We're not going to stop them, right, from selling it. Again, it's great for us. It's great for them. It's a win. But truly, the goal for us is getting in the headlines, getting those social posts. I think there's so many wonderful brands out there, but it's hard sometimes to cut through the noise. So our goal is to cut through the noise, right? In these times when there's a lot of headlines about a lot of different brands, what can we do to really drive home media coverage, influencer coverage, and social conversation?
Are there any? Oh, I'm curious because we just passed April Fools. Have you guys done an April Fools brand partnership?
We have done some in the past. We did not do it this year, but we did a lox and cream cheese bagel. And the picture, we just made it. The picture was actually like a vanilla cupcake with cream cheese icing, and then it had lox and like
Oh my
everything
gosh.
bagel seasoning on the top. And people wanted it. They were like disappointed that it wasn't a real thing. And so part of us was like, this is amazing, but also we might want to have to like, really think about what we're doing here because we don't want to disappoint people if it's not something that we actually have available. But I always love to see what brands do on April Fools because there's such a wide range. And sometimes it's truly like so well received. And then sometimes fans are just like, what's happening? So
Yeah.
you have to kind of like pick and choose how you do it.
But it's funny when the fans like they want the crazy creation
Yeah.
that was like meant
Yeah.
to be fake, but the people
Yes.
are like, no, I want to
Yes.
buy it.
Yeah. And we're like, oh, we don't have that actually.
How about, so you kind of mentioned like you guys are fortunately in a place where a lot of people will come to you and want to do brand partnerships.
Hmm.
Aside from the size of a brand, what are some of the things that you look for when deciding who you want to partner with?
Yeah, I think, definitely there's a real scale in size. So we've worked with really small brands, we've worked with bigger ones. It just depends. I think for us, we do always want to try for those larger partnerships where we're really creating a limited edition collection. It's not just, one item or it's not just a product that we're making for someone. We want to try to tap into different verticals. So we try not to repeat ourselves too much because what makes it special is that it is unique. It is special for customers to get. And so that's part of it. I think we look for like-minded teams. I think you can tell pretty quickly on a call, like, this is going to be a good partnership. We're really going to work together versus not quite speaking the same language, which puts you not at a great starting point for creating a successful partnership. Those are really the two key factors. And certainly, we want anyone we work with, whether an individual or a brand, we want them to be well received publicly, online and things like that. We want someone who's the brand is well positioned and liked and enjoyed. And we want them to feel the same way about us.
Yeah, interesting to hear because I imagine there's a world of possibility once you get to like a certain stature of like you guys, in theory, maybe could work with everybody, but getting to like pick the ones that you think that your audience would be most excited or interesting about is always really fun. And like I said, it's always
Mm-hmm.
so fun to see sometimes collaborations that are so unexpected that you never would have
Mm-hmm.
guessed that the brand would have done that. But that makes it so much more fun when you see them
Yes.
come out and makes you want to share it and
Yeah.
makes you want to engage with it.
Yeah, and I think I understand when you are a growing brand, it's much more challenging to say no because you're always looking for opportunities to grow and get in front of people. I think because of where we are, both in our history, but also just in the number of projects that we're working on, it's like just as important to say no as it is to say yes to the right opportunities. And it takes a little while to figure out what falls into which category.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I know you mentioned you started in PR and you moved into this partnerships role. So, can you maybe explain a little bit about what about partnerships made you decide that that's really where you wanted to go and like did that PR background help you excel in this partnerships path that you've chosen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think even taking a step back from that, before I joined Magnolia, I had always worked with PR agencies, which is, I think agencies of any kind, marketing, advertising, PR, it is a great sort of education in what, it is like to work with outside people, really having a point of view in how you run a program, what types of stories you should pitch, kind of that skill of just making your voice heard and being able to hold your ground in having an opinion about something. It made it easier to be part of a really small team where there weren't as many people, right? Like coming up with ideas to be like, okay, let's do this. Let's all sit here and come up with something. When I moved into the role with Magnolia, I had come from a PR agency at that time, but because of we were such a small team when I joined that we all really worked cross functionally. And I think that was a great like baseline for being able to step into different roles and take on, new responsibilities because you're not an expert on every single thing that you're doing, but you have a sense, right, of like what's going on in the business and how things work and how things come together. And I think all of those things kind of pooled together allowed me to then step into the partnership role and look at things, thinking through operationally, production wise, how does this all work together for us? And I think for me, it was also, at the time, partnerships, as you mentioned, right, becoming so popular. It's such a key element of brands. It's something that I think most brands have in their toolkit, right? So it was also just timing of being able to step into that and say, let's use this as an extension of how we talk about the brand and how we garner attention for the brand.
Are there any skills like or for somebody who's excited about potentially working in partnership marketing and they want to move toward that in their career, is there anything you think they should work on building now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think across the board, truthfully, even when we interview interns, we have like a fantastic content intern. It's really coming to the table with a clear point of view and a vision for how things come together. It may not be how it turns out, right? Things change. You're going to, take into consideration other ideas and viewpoints, but really looking at something critically in a positive way where you're just really thinking through what is the outcome of this that I want? What could we do together? And what story am I telling? And I think with partnerships, especially when you're pitching a company partnerships, like truly come with an idea. It's amazing how many people reach out and say, wouldn't it be great to do something together? Without any additional information. And it's so flattering. It's so lovely, right? But you're like, well, sure, but what would we do? And I think that's kind of how we've been able to open the door, just sending someone an email from Manos and saying, hey, look, here's an idea. We're going to lay it all out for you, what we're going to do to support this promotion, how we could work together. Here's our brand deck. What do you say? Let's have a chat. And we had a chat and we came up with something really cool. It's not always that easy, but I do think coming in with a clear vision is like half the battle. And again, kind of like looking at things, looking at opportunities, there can be so much excitement about something, especially when there's a celebrity or this, you can really tap into this pop culture moment. But if you take a step back and look at it, is it actually going to get the outcome that you're looking for? Sometimes yes, but sometimes it's going to take a lot more work and not actually drive what you're hoping it will drive.
Interesting. And I love the advice there specifically around being specific about your ideas. And I think it's
Mhm.
also great if you want to interview for a partnerships role and you even come in with an idea for a partnership role.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, like what
Yes.
a great way to start
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and I think again, this is I do so often, right? Like what seems like common sense stuff is repeated because it's not always coming through when you interview someone or when someone's in a position. I think even when you're interviewing, so often people don't come fully prepared for the company that they're interviewing for. You are never expected to know everything about the company, but come with some specific questions or just take a look at their LinkedIn page, right? And see the past three things that they posted so you know sort of what's relevant and what's happening. And you'd be surprised how much that doesn't happen. And it's a lot of curiosity. You're just looking for someone who's curious and hungry and interested in what you're doing. And that goes a long way because you can learn a lot of skills, but it's hard to teach that.
I love that. Being curious, showing that you're interested. And you're so right. And I often feel like on the podcast too, sometimes I'm like repeating the advice, but it's because like,
Yeah.
I see it all the time. We're hiring
Mm-hmm.
right now at Sky Society. And even when someone puts a little note in their application that's like, I've been
Yeah.
following Sky Society, or I love that you guys do this, like, it really makes me consider them more. And I feel like people
Mm-hmm.
don't do it because they're like, everybody's doing it. I'm not going to stand
Yes.
out, but so few people do that. And I can always so quickly tell when I get on an interview with somebody if they spent time to look at the brand.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy. I'm
Yes.
sure you too can totally tell if somebody like just is applying to a bunch of jobs and showing up to
Yes.
interviews versus somebody who's
Yes.
genuinely excited to be at this interview.
Yes. And look, I say that all with the caveat of like, I understand the job market is very challenging. It's hard to send the resumes out and then prepare for the interviews. But I do think ultimately you'll stand out a lot more, especially if you've gotten to the point of an interview. If you
Yeah.
do like, do a little research beforehand, just to like show that you're really, truly interested in the position.
Yeah, because I think the advice always shares, I think the mistake people make is they try to practice the interview questions. Like, oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
preparing for interviews, I'm practicing how to answer questions versus I'm preparing for interviews, I'm studying the company. Like, I'm studying their
Yes.
values, I'm studying their mission.
Yes.
I know who's interviewing me, and I'm going to their LinkedIn and I'm doing a little bit of stalking, and
Yes.
I'm
Totally. Yeah.
interviewing for
Yeah.
email marketing, so I subscribe to their email list. Like,
Yes.
it's those,
Yes.
that's really what preparing should look like.
Yes, absolutely. And, with interviews too, I think there's no trick questions because they're asking things that you have experience in, that you're interested in already. So it is so true to really look at the company. And I think what's really wonderful is so many companies, especially nowadays, are transparent about their values and even just what drives them as a company, what their goals are. And so that's not an unknown when you go into the interview. And if it is, then it's also kind of maybe something you think about the company and is it a good fit for you? Because that's just as important, I think, as you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, kind of thing.
Yeah, it goes both ways. And
Hmm.
anyone listens to this podcast, I love my dating analogies. And it's the same thing. If you want to go on a date with someone, you better make sure their values align with your values and vice versa.
Hmm.
Like, that's so important. And it's so important with companies too. And that, like, I always say to you, like, companies give you all the answers to the test. They tell you
Yes,
what they want.
exactly.
This
Yes.
is exactly what we were
Yes.
looking for. This is what we value. Like, they tell you all the information.
Yes,
Just up
absolutely.
to you to look at it. And those little things, again, I think just go such a far way. And then
Hmm.
little things too of like the being thoughtful and the thank you notes or all of those stuff. And
Yep.
I just think super underrated and super impactful.
Completely. Yeah, I often think of my aunt Karen, who for many years was a corporate psychologist. She works worked with companies, to sort of like reorganize their structure. And from, I think when I was like a freshman in college, who always be like, you must send a thank you note for every interview ever. And I'm like, well, it's still true, right? It's like, it's still so important to send. And again, you don't assume everyone does it. It's like not everyone does. And it does stand out when you have taken the time to do something like that.
Absolutely. And also, I'll say, take a step away from ChatGPT, guys.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
can also
Yes.
tell
Yes.
ChatGPT wrote you
Yes.
a thank you email.
Use your own words.
Use your
It's like,
own
it's
words.
okay. Yeah.
Share a personal, even if it's like I loved learning this about the company or
Hmm.
a personal thing from the interview because I cannot thank you email. Well, for sending one already, you're ahead of the game. But then the other thing on top of that is to make it actually personal.
Yes.
Yeah, my ChatGPT detectors are on
Yeah.
full alert all the way through. Okay, Sarah, one of the other things I had told you that I was really curious to talk to you about today is what titles look like once you've made it far in your career. So, for most of our audience, I think is a little bit maybe on the newer side to their career in like
Hmm.
coordinator, manager type positions. But once you get past that, like I'll just looking at stalking your LinkedIn, I got VP is kind of one of your earlier, not earlier, but
Hmm.
more recent roles. So can you kind of talk to us like where the jump is between what's the last position before VP and then like what do you look for next in your career kind of once
Hmm.
you hit that VP level?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is almost every company has a slightly different way of
True.
titling things. And so it makes it a little tricky. What I will say is when you're looking for a job, you do have to type in your keywords and things like that. And part of that ends up being sort of the title. Take a close look at the responsibilities because you might find that a manager level in one place is like a director level at another or vice versa, and so it's like really about your years of experience. Does the salary work for you? Do the benefits work for you? And really seek opportunities based around that versus the title. I do think it's important when you start any job, though, to understand what the career path looks like. I think working for a small company, there were a lot of benefits because I was able to get so much experience. Even my first job in PR was I had my own clients because it was such a small team. I wasn't just doing sort of the admin stuff. And so that was a great learning opportunity. It didn't look as fancy from the outside, but it allowed me to really like dig into things and get started right away on that like next step. So that's something to consider too, is just, a coordinator at one company, is a great opportunity to maybe grow in that path, but you can learn just as much at a small company and then move to somewhere bigger. That's all to say, I think with the career path at my level, it's really taking on more of a manager role and working and making sure that the team of people that surround me have what they need to be successful, and I'm also providing them opportunities to grow. So it's more about the strategy and working with the team versus that the day in and day out sort of like nitty gritty of all the different things that we're doing. But I think, that's been kind of a great sort of trajectory for me because I have a lot of experience in the nitty gritty. I got to do that for a really long time. And now I'm able to step away from that a little bit, but work with a great team of people who can then execute things, where I'm working more on the higher level, meaning like the strategy and just management of people.
I love the advice of starting your career at smaller companies. I've talked about this a lot as well before. To your point of just getting to have as much experience as possible,
Hmm.
really is what's going to help propel you in your career more than any title. Because, as you said, titles are so different across companies. And while you can get fired at any time, nobody can take away your experience. That is your sticky
Hmm.
forever. I am also curious because when you started at Magnolia Bakery, were you in a leadership position?
So, we were really, I was like a team of one. So I didn't, it was such a small company at the time. So most of us were pretty individual in how we worked. And so it was a lot of exposure to sort of that cross functional work because we worked so closely together to execute things. And so there wasn't like layers of people to do everything. So I think that's a little bit different where now I'm managing people directly.
I'm curious when starting and being an individual contributor and then now growing to where you're managing multiple people, what are some lessons lessons that you've kind of learned along the way about being a good leader?
I think, one of the biggest things is that everyone's perspective is important. So I think sometimes as a human, right, and as someone who's been in any job for a long time, it can sometimes be hard to just like pause the ego a little bit or pause your own ideas or assumptions about things. But our intern can come with great ideas for content, and it's like, yes, thank you. Do that, And I have a wonderful colleague, Ariana, who works on the partnerships with me. She's always coming with like, I saw this brand. I think we should reach out to them. And it's like, yes, go reach out to them. And so you kind of have to learn that not all the ideas are yours, right? You don't own all of them. And so really working together as a team. And again, part of that is being just, even though everyone has a level, everyone has a title, it's like you're all working towards the same goal. Your responsibilities might look a little different, but at the end, you're just all working towards the same thing. And you want to accept everyone's ideas, that come along with that. Um, but I think with managing people, it's also about coming to them where they are. Everyone's different, myself included, on how you work best, and what's important to you. I think the other thing as a company and also as an individual, it's like people have lives and they have things that happen to them in their life that may impact their work. And that's okay. It's like no one has to be perfect. We make a mistake, we address it, and then we move on. I think that's really important as a company culture because things do happen. It's just, nature of running a business with so many things going on. And it's just important to remind people that it's like, it's okay. You can make a mistake, you can learn from it, and then you keep going. And I think that just creates a much more positive environment, no matter what your position, to be able to just keep moving forward. And so that's been, I've had a wonderful team in place, and I think it's just kind of navigating relationships. You mentioned dating earlier. It's kind of like dating where it's like every relationship's a little bit different. How you talk might be a little bit different, and that's okay. You just kind of have to navigate them each a little differently.
What are qualities that are non-technical that you think are really valuable in today's workforce?
Yeah, I think being communicative is really important. It is a skill to learn how to not just manage your own time, but to manage up, to communicate up to the team or around the team so that everybody's on the same page and in the loop. I think especially nowadays when things move so fast, it can be so easy to forget to share information, right? Which is kind of wild when you think about how much is shared every day through apps and social and all those things. I think that's really important. And I think, especially if you are more of an introverted person or a person who might be more aware of kind of negative feedback or feeling like you're getting negative feedback, kind of like forcing yourself to say an idea out loud and be prepared, to defend that idea. Same for public speaking, because I think even when you're presenting to a group of three people and you have to present a deck of updates or whatever, just it's like a skill. Some people have it very naturally. Most people don't, and you have to practice. That's okay. It's like kind of forcing yourself to use that muscle that you're not using in your day-to-day life as much.
I love that. I also love speaking for the introverts as a fellow introvert. And even if you're not, I think a lot of us can relate to not wanting to share ideas out of fear of rejection or
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
the youngest one in the meeting, or it's scary to say those things, and it's also sometimes can feel bad when maybe you do share an idea and it gets
Hmm.
passed off. But the reality is of like nobody's thinking, no one thinks you're bad for sharing that idea, or no one's thinking negatively of you if they don't accept it. But that
Yeah.
practice of speaking up, and I think especially, I think with Zoom too, it can feel really intimidating because you have to like unmute
Hmm.
yourself and you don't want to talk over
Yes. The little
somebody.
hand that like raises,
Yes,
that you have to say
yes.
something. Yeah.
Like
No,
there's all those
totally.
things,
Yeah.
but it's so important, such an important skill
Yes.
to cultivate.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think too, it doesn't always come naturally to think this way, but it's not personal when someone doesn't like your idea, right? It is very much about the project or the goal or just the business at large. And so being able to talk to each other person to person and saying like, I like where your mind's at, but let's maybe go this way instead. And I think you can have a lot of productive conversations like that. But being mindful that people are taking a risk maybe in sharing something and not just saying like, no, it's like you have to really talk through and hear people out.
Yeah, something I always like to do. I'm learning, and as the Sky Society team grows, we're very small, but I'm learning as I start to manage more. Is I love explaining why if I like pass on someone's idea
Hmm.
instead of just being like no. I always like to take the time to say like this isn't
Yep.
why I said no, to give them
Yep.
better insight, so that way the next time when they share something,
Yep.
they can be a little bit closer versus just being like no and then moving on.
Yeah, and just to throw another like reason to work for a smaller company is you can be a little bit closer to understanding the bigger picture, which is like a key word that, people often talk about. But it is really important, I think, when you're starting out, especially even those first like 3 to 5 years, depending on the scope of your role and the scope of the business, you might not really understand like why are we doing it? And why does this small piece make such a big difference in this big project? And so always ask the question if you're not sure, because I think that can also make your job make more sense, right? And your projects make more sense that you're working on.
Yeah, and I always say too, and I give this advice a lot of like understanding the work that you do that is also tied to revenue because sometimes
Hmm.
again, like you don't know that might not really know like you were hired to do this thing and you might have tunnel vision on that idea
Yeah.
and it probably contributes to something larger that's probably
Hmm.
tied to revenue, which is probably what your bosses are being measured against.
Yes.
And
Yep.
so being mindful of that and kind of understanding I think is really important and not maybe something
Hmm.
you might be thinking about when you're a social media intern, but stuff that is good for you to start to be aware of and going back to your
Yep.
point of understanding
Yep.
the bigger picture.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, Sarah, I'm curious. You have such this incredible career and this incredible growth. What is something that you are really grateful for now with kind of what you built for yourself in your life and your career?
Yeah, so I'm really thankful to have had an opportunity to grow with a brand in this way. My background at agencies was working for, like tech companies, like Skype video calling and Netflix streaming and, just such a different type of product, completely different. People enjoy those things very much, but not in the same way that they do, the Magnolia Bakery brand and like that experience. And I've just had so many amazing projects that I've been able to work on. And so that it really does, keep me going when it's like every job, no matter what level, has things that are not as exciting, right? Like you have to do the paperwork, you have to build out the decks, you have to do all those things. So it's in my role today, it feels like there's a great balance between those things, which are just as important, and sort of these like fun things like the partnerships that we can launch and really, build excitement around. And I'm really thankful that I, get to do this job and, still feel very much like there's a balance in my life so that I can have a life outside of this great job.
Yeah, I love and being a mom as well outside of your career as well. Great
Yep.
combination.
Yeah, exactly. I've been really fortunate that I have this role and, for a couple of years, especially when my children were really young, I had the opportunity to work a reduced schedule. So I had, I could keep this amazing job and work at this level, but still be with my kids. And I very much recognize that not everyone has that opportunity. And I think, providing opportunities like that for working parents is so important because otherwise you kind of have to disconnect fully from like the workforce and this type of
Yeah.
role. And so I'm really thankful that I've been able to keep working in this way all these years.
I love that. And any last advice that you want to share with marketing girlies who maybe want to build a career like yours?
Yeah, I think, just don't be afraid, right? Like if you see something you really like and you find the person on LinkedIn, reach out, say hello, see if they have time for coffee. I think you'd be surprised how many people are open to those types of opportunities or connecting with younger people and, just remain curious and also remain clear on what you like and what you don't like. I think if you really listen to yourself, you know pretty quickly how things fall. And it's important to find jobs and companies that really meet and help excel, all the positive that you enjoy in work and in life. You want to feel good in both areas.
That is beautiful. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on Marketing Girly. I
Thank you for having
absolutely,
me.
Of course. This was such a fun episode, and hearing your career journey is just so inspiring. So, thank you so much for coming on and sharing it today.
Thank you.